as I started to process, as I started to really just dive into the Word and, get advice from pastors and mentors, it became very apparent that I still loved my husband. I just didn't love the disease that he was fighting, the addiction. And so I really had to work on separating the two things, the sin and the sinner. And I loved the sinner. And that was part of God's process in me. And I realized that the forgiveness aspect of my healing journey was not so much for my husband, but I needed to forgive myself. And I was the one that needed more forgiveness. And it's really hard to explain that. A lot of women just kind of get it if they've been in this position. But for myself, God was teaching me so many different things throughout this journey. And the moment that I spoke, "I forgive you" to my husband, that's when God really started to work on my heart. And that's kind of when the hard work began, but that's when the beauty of the story started.
Stephanie Broersma joining us today here on the Meeting House on Faith Radio, the Christian Product Expo International 2019 in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. So Stephanie, so many questions here with respect to the story. Your husband had really experienced a dramatic event in his life, a transformational event through Christ. He had and confessed to you pornography addiction, as well as engaging in affairs.
Yes.
You received the news. How long did it take? Now, one of the steps, you had mentioned that you all separated. One of the steps was for you to actually say to him that you forgave him. How long did that take?
Well, God has a funny way with timelines, and it was on day 10 of our separation, which just so happened to be Good Friday.
Okay.
So I wanted to accept what Christ had done on the cross for my sins, but I wasn't willing to offer forgiveness to anybody else, especially my husband. Like I could offer it to somebody who had said, something horrible to me, but, I really wanted the blood of Christ to wash me and to cleanse me of my sins, but I wasn't willing to give it to the person that I was married to. And so God and I really wrestled that day. And, finally, God, broke through to my own heart, and I was able to speak those words, but I needed to say them, to believe them, to hear them. And then post Good Friday, it was a daily discipline to walk out that forgiveness, to remind myself when I was, approached with a trigger or a memory, or to replay that confession to say, no, you chose forgiveness. You're choosing restoration. And so I would have to speak it. I would have to write it. I would have to say it to Tim, just to remind myself of my heart posture that I had chosen to make.
And obviously he had some work to do as well. And the two of you had to do work, because I would imagine, just going out on a limb here, that all of a sudden your marriage wasn't perfect.
There was nothing magical in that moment.
In other words, you had to work on the healing process of your marriage. And it was a process, I would imagine.
Yes. It was a process for, we're 10 years post-confession, and there's still moments where we're still trying to better our marriage and make it stronger. But, honestly, for 2 years post-confession, we kept our story very, very quiet. Our circle was, intentionally small for the purpose of restoration. So we had counselors, we had mentors, accountability, boundaries and fences in place. But we did not share with a lot of our family members or close friends. They didn't know until our church asked us for our video testimonies 2 years later. And that's really when the ministry was born, was out of these video testimonies, which then the 700 Club contacted us and asked to film our testimonies. So we went from having a really small circle to a national platform.
Well, and you mentioned not only forgiving your husband, but also forgiving yourself. And you said something very interesting, that women that have been in this situation can relate to what you were going through as far as your own need to forgive yourself. In other words, you bore the burden of what had happened, or what your husband was engaging in. In other words, you felt that it was your fault.
Absolutely. That was the first thing, is what did I do wrong? How did I create this mess? And so to really have to do that self-reflection and realize that, I can't control the outcome of this marriage. I can't control my husband or have him choose to do this or to do that. I had to really say, okay, God, this is between you and me.